Hi, good morning, everyone. Okay, so today we are going to go through our first chapter in anatomy and physiology, which is basically known as Introduction to Anatomy and Physiology. So, in this module, you will be exposed, you will be informed or been actually exposed to what is anatomy and physiology, and then how does it actually relate with all the medical terminologies and anatomy positions, so that you will be able to identify the structure in your body, and also will be able to elaborate and explain more in details about the functions of each structure in the body. Okay, now without further ado, I would like to share my slides. Okay. All right. So, unit of life and organization of body structure. All right. So, the learning outcome that I expected from this class is that you will be able to define what is anatomy and what is physiology. And then you will be able to describe the structural organization of the human body. You will be able to define the body systems and explain how they relate to one each other. Okay. Because the body is actually an organism that works together. All the things in the body are working together, um, and relate to each other, and so that it can function as an organism. Okay, define homeostasis and explain its importance, and describe the component of the feedback system in the homeostasis itself. Okay, and then in the homeostasis we have what we call as negative and positive feedback. So basically what I want you to achieve by the end of the session is that you will be able to compare the operation of negative and positive feedback systems, and you will be able to differentiate or distinguish between the symptoms and signs of a disease. Okay, and of course, the most important thing is you'll be able to describe the anatomical position, because that then will later on help you to identify the major regions of the body and relate the common names to the corresponding anatomical terms for various parts of the body. All right, and then define the directional terms and anatomical planes and sections that use to locate parts of the human body, and describe the principal body cavities and the organs they contain. Explain why the abdominal pelvic cavity is divided into regions and quadrants. Okay. Okay, now let's go to the definitions of anatomy and physiology. So basically, as I mentioned before in our previous lecture, anatomy itself is basically a knowledge about the body structure, or the body structure, the structures that actually exist in the human body, all right? And then when we talk about the physiology, of course, it is actually a knowledge that explain the functions of each structure that exists in your body. Okay, so when you talk about anatomy, of course, it's really referred to the structure, and when you talk about physiology, then it relates to the functions, and that's the reason why it is always been um, taught together, ya, yang kita ajar sama-sama between the anatomy and physiology, so that you'll be able to understand better. All right, when you talk about the structure and why does it name as such, then you can relate it with the physiology, with the functions, of the structure. Okay. Now, the levels of organization, I don't think that I have to go through into details about this, because it has been taught in the secondary and also in the foundation or matriculations. Um, Basically, of course, we'll start with an atoms, which is atoms. Then a group of atoms then will form a molecules, right? And then the cellular is actually the basic unit of life, and in the cellular itself, it contains organelles which have their own and specific functions. And then we have a group of cells that form a tissue. Okay, so a tissue itself. We have four types, what we call as epithelial tissue, and then we have what we call as connective tissue, muscular tissue, and also nervous tissue. Right, and then a group of tissues, okay, a combination of tissues, type of tissues, then will form an organ. Okay, and then a few organs that functions to achieve one goal is called a system. Right, and then accumulations of systems that forms a lot of functions then form an organism, which is a human or individual itself. Okay. So this is the level of organization, right? And then when you talk about human, the life process itself, it always related to this process. We have what we call as metabolism process, responsiveness process, movement, growth, differentiation, and also reproduction. So some of the process is actually under control. Some under our control, some of the process can be uncontrolled. It happens 24 hours without control. Let's say like movement. The gross movement mm, is it can be under control, it can be controlled. Nah, tapi kalau macam katakan growth or the metabolism process, the translation process at the cellular level or the tissue level, that will be definitely not under control. So it's happened by itself 24 hours. Okay. All right. So this is what it means by movement, basically change in position of the body or of a body part. The motion of an internal organ is also called as a movement process. And then you have a responsiveness, which is a reaction to a change inside or outside the body. Growth, increase in body size without change in shape. Reproduction is the production of new organisms and new cells, where we have what we call as mitosis, meiosis, and then respiration, where we obtain oxygen and then remove the carbon dioxide from the body, release energy from foods, and etc. Okay, and then digestive is the breakdown of the substance that we take, and it is actually being break down into a simpler form, and so that it can be easily absorbed and be used or converted into energy. Okay, absorption, passage of substance through membranes and into body fluids. Circulation is a movement of substance in the body fluids. It's always referred to the body fluids. Assimilation, changing of absorbed substance into different chemical forms, and also excretion, removal of waste product by the metabolic reactions or process. Okay, so how does the body is actually functions? Our body is very complex in the way that it is not can be easily copied and formed by humans. So that's why God created in such a way that it is very complex. But with the knowledge that we have, we will be able to actually explain the functions and relate each each of the systems together. Okay. So let's say you are eating every day, whatever that you eat, it enters the digestive systems, all right? And then from here, then the respiration happens and the circulation happens, absorption happens. All the nutrients will be absorbed by the cells, right? And then where it will be carried into the blood also. So the excretion nanti akan di-excrete dekat urinary system to the external environment. Dia akan dikeluarkan dalam bentuk waste, where those excess salts and water dan sebagainya lah. Okay, and then the respiratory system here in the blood, it carries the oxygens. So in the blood then itself, it will circulate to the whole of the body. All right, and then when it comes to the lung, dia akan excrete the carbon dioxide. So it's actually related to each other. There's a lot of other system that actually has not been mentioned here, but it relates. Contoh macam endocrine system, nervous system. Without those system, the other system cannot be functioning well. Okay. All right, now let's talk about homeostasis. So homeostasis is basically where a process that a body is trying to maintain a stable internal environment. So it's always happened in the body, internal environment. The dynamic process, because of many changes, can be happen. For example, there are a lot of factors that can make changes to the body. We have like changing in the body temperature, changes of blood pressure, changes of water and nutrient level, which that changes can be maintained by the feedback system in the homeostasis process. Okay, so the component that help the homeostasis process is where we must have the stimulus. The stimulus is the one that disrupt a control variable. Okay, and then we must have the receptor that recognize the changes and send the pathway to the central nervous system, to the brain, yeah, so that it can actually where we call as a control center lah. The brain is a control center, so that the brain itself can evaluate the input and send the output, send the response, the output to the effector, so that the effector can respond to that changes, to alter the variable. Okay. Okay. So this is the general explanation about the homeostasis. Katakan adanya perubahan yang berlaku yang mengganggu proses homeostasis itu sendiri, dia akan menyebabkan berlakunya increasing changes or decreasing changes. So this control condition that is monitored by the receptor captured that changes, and then they send the input to the control center, to the brain. So the brain then will receive the input and interpret the input. Okay, so once they have interpreted the input, then they will send the output to the effector. So the effector will then respond to the changes, whether it will actually help to ensure that the normal condition of the body is returned back, or to enhance the changes for the sake of the normal process. Okay. So let's go to the negative feedback dulu. So tadi yang bila saya sebut dekat sini, yang inilah yang kita panggil sama ada berlakunya negative feedback dekat sini ataupun daripada effector, daripada effector sampailah ke sini balik semula, it's either a negative feedback ataupun a positive feedback. So let's just see what does it mean by negative feedback. So most homeostatic control mechanism are negative feedback. So what does it mean by negative? Of course, it's something that is opposite lah. So kalau you have some changes, whether it is actually related to increasing of the blood pressure, for example. So when we call the negative feedback system happen, which means from increased blood pressure, then it helps to reduce the blood pressure until it achieves the normal blood pressure. So that is what we call as opposite. So daripada increase tu dia akan turunkan, naik, dia akan turunkan, naik dan turun is something that opposite. Dia akan turunkan sehinggalah ia mencapai kepada satu tahap yang dikatakan sebagai blood pressure yang normal. Okay, so this system reverse a change in the control variable, bringing it back to normal. For example, like high blood pressure, like I mentioned before, where it is detected and then lowered to the normal level of blood pressure. Okay, so for example, there are some stimulus disrupt the homeostasis system by increasing the blood pressure. Okay, so when the blood pressure is increasing, ada stimulus yang menyebabkan blood pressure meningkat. Contoh, stress factor adalah satu stimulus, ataupun makanan yang tinggi garam, high salt intake is also a stimulus that later on will results in increasing of the blood pressure. So when the blood pressure is increasing, okay, here the receptor in certain blood vessels, what we call as the baroreceptor that located in the blood vessels, they detected that there is a changes happen in the blood pressure, which is high blood pressure lah. Okay, so the receptor then, with the baroreceptor, will send an input through the nerve impulse to the control center, our brain. So the brain will interpret it. Oh yeah, it is a high blood pressure. Okay, it is a high blood pressure. So the brain then will send an output through the nerve impulse to the effector, which is the heart. Okay, so what does the control center instruct the hearts to do? It instructs the hearts to decrease in heart rate so that the blood pressure will also decrease. Bila dia punya heart rate rendah, jadi dia tak akan pump dengan laju, jadi darah yang masuk ke dalam blood vessel tu tidaklah terlalu banyak dalam satu masa. So pressure dia tu akan berkurang. Kalau if you just imagine if the heart is actually pumping very fast, the heart rate, when you say heart pumping, that refers to your heart rate. So when the heart is actually pumping very fast and very strong, so that is actually results in large amount of cardiac output, a large amount of volume of blood that come out from the heart itself. So bila volume of blood tu banyak yang keluar daripada jantung, dia akan masuk ke blood vessels. That will actually give more pressure to the blood vessels. So give more pressure to the blood. So that's why the control center instructed the heart to decrease in heart rate. So that when they decrease in heart rate, the blood pressure then will also decrease because the volume of blood is decreasing in the blood vessels. So it will slowly decrease in heart rate until it reach to the normal blood pressure. So this is what we call as negative feedback. Okay. All right. Now let's move to the positive feedback, and then you must try to distinguish between these two type of feedback. Okay. So as I mentioned before, negative feedback, most of the feedback in homeostasis is actually referring to negative feedback. However, there are a few of the homeostatic control mechanism are of this type, the positive feedback system. This system is basically works to strengthen the changes and must be shut down by an outside force. For example, when you want to deliver a baby, okay, the changes that happen is that there are contraction of uterus. Okay, so basically your uterus is not being contracted. In a normal condition, it's not contract. So it's always in relaxed condition. But changes because of the pressure, because of the push factor, because of the changes in hormone, the oxytocin is there. So then it actually stimulates the contraction of uterus. So when this contraction of uterus happen, that results in changes of the uterus. So the positive feedback is where it enhances more oxytocin in the body so that the contraction will become more strengthened, become more frequent so that the baby will be able to be delivered. Okay. So that is what we call as positive feedback. So once the baby has been delivered, then there are outside forces that will actually help to return back the oxytocin level to the normal level, and it will slowly, takes time, slowly days to days, reduce the contraction of the uterus. Tapi positive feedback ni adalah something yang normal lah. Melahirkan anak tu kan satu yang normal. So saya tak kata negative feedback, positive feedback ni adalah satu yang jahat, negative feedback yang baik. Tidak. Whatever it is, both feedback is actually referring to a normal process where it helps the body to functions in its normal state. Okay. So another example is hormonal control of ovulations. So when you are at the menstrual period, okay, the hormone level, the estrogen level, the luteinizing hormone level will be very high. So at that time, they will keep on increase the hormone level. Itu satu lagi positive feedback. Dia akan enhance lagi, dia akan increasekan lagi pembebasan hormon tersebut for the sake of to ensure that the ovulation happens. So once the ovulation happens, then barulah dalam menstrual cycle tu dia akan jadi normal. Okay. So same with the systems that control blood clotting. Nanti kita akan tengok satu-satu later on. Okay. So kalau kita sebut pasal body temperature, dia refer pada negative feedback lah. Okay, and you boleh tengok. Okay. So aging and homeostasis. So what happened actually when you become old? What happened actually when your age is increased? The normal process that includes a progressive loss in the ability to maintain homeostasis. It will affect all body system and it can be slowed down or minimized by healthy living. So basically, when you have a healthy living style, you can actually minimize or slow down the progressive loss of the ability to maintain the homeostasis. Bila kita dah semakin tua, kita dah tak mampu lagi, badan dah tak mampu actually untuk maintain proses homeostasis. Tetapi sekiranya you mengamalkan gaya hidup yang sihat, healthy lifestyles, I do not say that you will be able to maintain the homeostasis for the whole of your life. No, but it will slow down the loss of the ability to maintain homeostasis tadi, or minimize the loss in the ability to maintain the homeostasis. Okay. All right, so there are clinical terms that you have to be familiar with, because when you talk about homeostasis, okay, we always talk when there is an inability to maintain the homeostasis process, then it will lead to disorder and disease. So kalau kita sebut disorder, disorder tu bermaksud abnormality of structure and functions. So functions dia tak boleh dah nak berfungsi seperti baik semula, ataupun ada struktur-struktur dia yang dah berubah. Mungkin disebabkan oleh external factors, mungkin juga disebabkan oleh congenital sejak lahir lagi. So itu kita panggil sebagai disorders. Kalau kita sebut disease, disease is actually a specific illness, which characterized by signs and symptoms. So now what's the difference between sign and symptoms? Symptoms is a subjective changes that when someone is experiencing that changes, they can be able to explain and elaborate the changes. Okay, whereby signs is something that can only be observed and measured, the changes that can be observed and measured through a few tests or using an assessment tools to describe the signs. For example, contoh macam high BP, you cannot say that I'm having headache. So headache is a symptom. Okay, but then when you're using the sphygmomanometer, you turn on your sphygmomanometer, then you detected your blood pressure is high. So the sphygmomanometer is an assessment tools that used to elaborate the signs of high BP, right? And then ankle swelling is the same thing. From your observation, you're using your eyes. You might see that your ankles have changes when you can compare right and left. Yeah? But what more important is the pain of your ankle, not the changes. So how do you actually be able to describe whether your ankle is swelling or not, your right or your left ankle is swelling or not? Of course, the one who will be observed accurately is the doctor, or the healthcare professional. They sit in front of you, ask you to strengthen your leg, and then they will do some comparison, and then they will palpate your leg to see the warmth, the tenderness, and so on, so that they can come up with by saying yes, there is a changes in your ankle, where it is swelling, where it is inflamed. Okay, fever sama juga. You rasa dengan tangan, you rasa panas, demam. But actually, the accurate part is using a tools. What do you use? The thermometer will help to define whether you are having fever or not. Okay. Okay, now autopsy is actually an examination and dissection of a body to determine the cause of death when life processes have not been maintained adequately. So when someone is dead, we are doing autopsy in the forensic to determine the cause of death. Okay, but not all cases lah. But in anatomy, doing autopsy, during my time dulu, it's very important, because there we will learn about the actual structure of the human body. So zaman saya belajar, we are using the cadaver. Cadaver, kita buat autopsy, dan kita tengok semua structure dalam body tu. Katakan hari ni saya belajar tentang cardiovascular system, so saya akan buat dissectional, saya buat autopsy, and then saya akan fokus kepada heart, and then all the capillary that in the human body, blood capillary in the human body. I identify it, label it. So that is how we learn by doing autopsy. If you learn about the anatomy, okay. But nowadays we're not using that anymore lah. Okay. Anatomical terms. It is a precise use of language to define position, direction, and location of the structure in the body. Okay, so when you talk about anatomical terms, first and foremost, you have to know the anatomical position. Now, what is the anatomical position of a human body? Is where someone stands erect facing the observer, okay, with head level and eyes facing forward. and the palms is facing forward too. Okay, so by using this anatomical position, you will be able to use a common anatomical terms, the accurate directional terms, planes and sections of the human body, and also the cavity. Okay, so let me show you the example of anatomical position. So this is what we call as anatomical position. Okay, a lady ya ataupun a man nanti ya, dia memandang depan, facing forward ya, and then the palms is also facing forward, and then kaki juga ni lah ya, jarak sedikit antara dua kaki. Okay, alright, this is for men. Alright. So there are a few directional terms that you have to be familiar with in anatomy. The midline of the body is also called as a midline, and something that moved forward to the midline or close to the midline is called as medial. Something structure yang mendekati midline yang kita panggil dia sebagai medial. Structure yang menjauhi midline kita panggil dia lateral. Okay, so this is the terms directional terms. Kalau structure tersebut dia letak di bahagian bawah badan ke arah gravity, itu kita panggil inferior. Kalau dia mendekati kepala, iaitu kita panggil superior, atas. Inferior bawah, superior atas. Okay, and then what we have as proximal and distal is also same thing. Proximal mendekati bahagian kepala, manakala distal sudah mendekati your toe, jari kaki. Ke arah jari kaki, proximal yang mengarah ke arah kepala. Okay. There's a few more. Of course, bahagian depan badan kita panggil anterior, bahagian belakang badan kita panggil posterior. Semua yang menghadap depan kita panggil anterior, semua yang menghadap belakang kita panggil posterior. Ataupun nama lain dia, yang menghadap depan itu kita panggil ventral, dan yang menghadap belakang kita panggil dorsal. Okay, so this is the plane, the human body plane. Because when you cut the human into planes, then you'll be able to see the structure inside the body. For example, bila you nak order untuk MRI, you nak order untuk CT scan, you kena mention dia punya plane tu. Okay, so the frontal plane. Okay, this is the frontal plane. Frontal plane ni dia akan potong badan menjadi dua, iaitu bahagian anterior dan bahagian posterior, bahagian depan dan bahagian belakang. So this is the frontal plane. Okay, nampak ni Manakala transverse plane yang plane yang macam ni, dia membahagikan badan kepada superior part dan inferior part. Okay, and then we have what we call as mid sagittal plane. Mid sagittal plane dia akan falls dekat midline kita. So bila dia falls dekat midline kita, dia akan membahagikan badan kita kepada right and left. Okay, and then we have what we call as oblique plane. So oblique plane ni dia membahagikan badan kita untuk melihat dari sudut angle. Then we have what we call as parasagittal plane. Parasagittal plane ni dia tak jatuh betul-betul dekat midline, dia jatuh mungkin jarak sedikit ke arah kiri atau ke arah kanan daripada mid-sagittal midline. Sebab mungkin ada beberapa structure tu dia perlu dilihat dengan lebih detail bila kita buat potongan parasagittal, baru kita boleh nampak, sebab dia tak duduk dekat ke arah midline, dan dia tidak duduk ke arah medial, dan dia tidak juga duduk ke arah lateral. So it's in between. That's why you have to cut it into parasagittal plane. Okay, so for example, if you want to see brain itself, kalau you buat transverse plane dekat brain, you can see bahagian superior dengan bahagian inferior. So ni anterior daripada brain tu, ni adalah posterior brain. So you cut it into half into the transverse plane, then you can actually see like this lah. Ni transverse section. So baru dah you nampak potongan brain ni macam ni. Okay. Kalau you cut it into frontal plane, tengah-tengah, then you akan bahagikan dia kepada bahagian anterior dan bahagian posterior. So you nampak section frontal brain jadi pula. So kan beza tadi. Boleh tengok potongan potongan brain dalam bentuk macam ni ataupun potongan brain yang dalam bentuk macam ni. Okay. If you're using the mid-sagittal plane, of course, you will actually cut the brain into right and left. Then you can see the hypothalamus. You can see the tempat penghasilan central spinal fluid, cerebrospinal fluid, CSF dan sebagainya. Okay. Alright, so this is the positional terms. We have what we call as midline tadi. Kita ada right and left, we have proximal and distal, we have medial, which is moving forward to the midline, and lateral, the organs that actually far away from the midline, lateral. Then superior bahagian atas, inferior bahagian bawah, proximal, distal, bahagian depan kita panggil anterior, bahagian belakang kita panggil posterior, atau nama lain dia ventral dan dorsal. Okay, so when you actually diagnose or define a fracture, contoh fracture, you pun akan define dia dengan menggunakan terms position tadi. Contoh menggunakan plane tadi. Kalau if you ingat tadi, kita ada transverse plane, kita ada sagittal, mid sagittal plane, kita ada frontal plane. Kalau macam ni, potongan macam ni kan, potongan patah tulang yang macam ni. So ini dipanggil transverse fracture. Ni transverse fracture. Kalau macam ni, dia mengiring, kita panggil oblique fracture. Kalau macam ni, kita panggil mid-sagittal fracture. Okay. Alright, so that's it about the part 1. Alright. Okay, now let's continue with the next slide. Part 2, Okay. So, kita dah bercerita pasal anatomical terms yang berkait rapat dengan positional. Kita dah bercerita pasal plane. Now, let's move to the body cavity. Okay. Dalam badan kita ni, we have a few body cavity. Kenapa dia dibahagikan dalam bentuk cavity? So that you will be able to define what are the structures in that cavity. Okay, the normal structures in that cavity. Some of the, if you remember what I called just now, the disorders. Disorders can be abnormality in the structure or abnormality in the functions. So if there are some of the structure that is abnormal in certain cavity, then it can be defined as a disorder. Jadi that's why you have to know first what is the normal structure in certain body cavity. Okay. Contohnya, kita ada yang kita panggil sebagai cranial and vertebral cavity. So dalam cranial cavity, kita ada brain lah. Dalam cranial ni, kita hanya ada brain sahaja. Manakala dalam tulang belakang kita, vertebral cavity, kita hanya ada spinal cord. Okay. Now, when you talk about thoracic cavity, thoracic cavity pula dia adalah chest cavity. Dekat dalam tu lah ada pleural, ada pericardial and mediastinal, which is those pleural will capsulate the lung, pericardial will capsulate the heart, and then the mediastinal is actually a region between two lungs, the right and left. Okay, and then next we have what we call as abdominal pelvic cavity. Okay, so abdominal pelvic cavity is actually a combination of abdominal cavity and pelvic cavity. Certain textbook they used it differently. Abdominal cavity, pelvic cavity, pelvic cavity. But I like to combine it together, or it can be in certain condition be separate also. So abdominal cavity ni adalah antara cavity yang besar. It has most of the abdominal pelvic organs. And it can be subdivided into 9 regions or 4 quadrants. When we talk about the pelvic cavity pula, it is smaller compared to abdominal cavity and it is located inferior, lebih bawah daripada abdominal cavity. Where in the pelvic cavity, there it contains the urinary bladder, the lower portions of digestive tract, which is the colon and the anus, rectum, and internal reproductive organs of male and female. Okay. Okay, dalam body cavity ni di antara tidak kira lah contoh kalau macam kita sebut thoracic cavity dan abdominal pelvic cavity dalam cavity ni dia kan ada yang membalutinya. Contoh thoracic tadi kita ada pleural dan kita ada pericardial. So this is actually this is actually a serous membrane. This is actually a serous membrane. Membran inilah yang dipanggil sebagai pleural dan pericardial. Okay, the functions is actually to capsulate the organs so that it is protected well, and because it has two layer, visceral layer and parietal layer, then in between that layer it has a fluid. So that will actually helps to reduce frictions. Sebab organ-organ yang ada dalam thoracic cavity dan juga di dalam dalam thoracic cavity ni, which is the lungs and the heart, mereka digunakan 24/7, tidak berhenti. Dia akan contract and relax tidak berhenti. Maka sekiranya tidak ada cairan, dia akan menyebabkan berlaku pergeseran. Macam you pakai kasut, kalau you berjalan tak berhenti, lama-lama dia akan haus. So that's why it is important for you to have this membrane, serous membrane with fluid inside, is to ensure that it can helps to reduce the friction whenever the organ is contract or relaxed. So the visceral layer is the one that attached together with the organs, bahagian dalam, manakala parietal layer is the one that lines the cavity, bahagian luar. Okay. So contoh dalam thoracic cavity ni dan abdominopelvic cavity, kalau kita ada serous membrane yang cover lungs tu, kita panggil dia pleural. Okay. Serous membrane yang cover the cardiac, the heart, kita panggil pericardial. Serous membrane yang cover all the abdominopelvic organs, kita panggil peritoneal. Okay. Alright. So this is the cavity yang saya mention, saya bebel tadi tu. This is the cranial cavity. Remember, the cranial cavity contain brain, and then we have the vertebral canal that contain the spinal cord. We have the thoracic cavity, which there we have our lungs and heart. Then we have abdominal pelvic cavity. It can be divided into abdominal cavity, the larger one, and the smaller one, which is the pelvic cavity. Okay. So this is from the right lateral view. So be familiar with these all terms. Right lateral view maksudnya dia di bahagian kanan badan, kita potong dia mengikut plane mid sagittal. Bila kita potong dia ikut plane mid sagittal, kita akan bahagikan badan kepada right and left. So when you take a picture of that, then you call it as right lateral view. Okay. Now, kalau tengok gambar B pula, it's an anterior view where you have a plane of what we call as frontal plane. So the frontal plane then will help you to see the anterior view of the human body and the posterior view of the human body. Okay. So you can read this summary of each of the cavity for you to understand better. All right. So I will not go through into this detail. Okay, you can just look into the atlas and try to identify the structures that contain here. Yeah. Saya nak tunjuk. Okay. Dalam badan kita ni, we have a few systems. Habis dah cerita pasal cavity, saya nak cerita apa the system yang exist dalam badan kita. Kita ada what we call as integumentary system, which explain about the skins, the largest organ, and then we have the skeletal system, the muscular system, that works together, interrelated between each other, and then the nervous system, the endocrine system that also interrelated with each other, cardiovascular system, lymphatic system, kita ada digestive system, respiratory system, urinary system, and a reproductive system. So these all system is actually working together to form the functions of a human. All right. So let me move to the final slide. Let me move to the final slide. Okay. Now I am going to explain about the abdominal pelvic cavity. If you remember tadi, saya dah habis cerita pasal sistem-sistem tadi secara general saja. Sebab nanti kita akan specifically explain about the function of each system. If you remember in the cavity, just now I mentioned about the abdominal pelvic cavity, kita boleh bahagikan kepada 9 regions ataupun 4 quadrants kan. Okay, sekarang kita pergi ke 9 regions dulu sebab abdominal pelvic cavity ni antara cavity yang besar dan banyak organ yang ada di dalam cavity ini. So it's very important for you to know what are the organs that actually exist in this abdominal pelvic cavity. So when you actually divide the abdominal pelvic cavity into 9 regions, so these are the regions and you have to memorize these names. Okay, because when a doctor is actually writing their reports, their medical reports, or the nurses are doing their report, nursing report, you have to be able to write a proper report with a proper terms and locations of each. Contoh kalau patient tu kata, I'm having pain here, you cannot draw lepas tu letak tangan tunjuk. That will take time. So basically you know that region already. That is an epigastric region. So in your report, shift complaint, epigastric pain. So bila sebut epigastric pain, you dah tahu dah pain tu dekat epigastric region, for example. So that is how they prepare the report. So when you pass over your report, the one who actually going to continue your task for the next shift, they already understand because the terms is well used. Tak adalah lagi dah istilah nak melukis lepas tu tunjuk anak panah, orang ni kata you ke ni epigastric region ke left hypochondriac region. So confused dekat situ, tapi menggunakan nama yang betul tu adalah satu penggunaan yang tepat lah untuk kita define the structure, okay, ataupun tempatnya kat mana. Okay, the 9 regions can start with the right hypochondriac region, and then we have here what we have our liver. Kat sini kita ada kita punya liver. Kemudian kita ada epigastric region. Epigastric region ni laluan esophagus sampailah dekat bahagian part of the gaster, perut. Kemudian kita ada left hypochondriac region. So dekat left hypochondriac region ni you ada you punya spleen, you ada you punya part of the gaster also, dan you ada you punya pancreas dekat situ. Okay, kemudian left lumbar region, dekat sini you ada you punya renal, you punya renal, buah pinggang, okay, you punya renal, and then you ada you punya part of colon, and then you have your intestine dekat umbilical region, most of your intestine dekat umbilical region, dan bahagian sigmoid, transverse colon, Kemudian you have what we call, this is as your ascending colon dekat right lumbar region, dan juga ada right renal, Kemudian kat sini kita ada right inguinal ataupun right iliac region. Dekat sinilah you ada you punya appendix, and then a part of your colon, kemudian hypogastric pubic region, dekat sini you ada you punya uterus pada perempuan, you ada you punya bladder, undi kencing, then you have your other reproductive system lah, organs lah dekat sini. Okay, and then left inguinal iliac region, sama juga dekat sinilah tempat you adanya bahagian rectum, a part of the rectum, dan juga a part of your reproductive system. Contoh macam pada perempuan mungkin ada sebahagian daripada ovarian, dia akan falls dekat left inguinal region dan right inguinal region, sebab you ada dua kan ovary. Okay, kalau you bahagikan dia, so these are the organs lah. Okay, kalau you bahagikan dia kepada 4 quadrant, then you can name it in larger area lah. Right upper quadrant, left upper quadrant, right lower quadrant, and left lower quadrant. Alright, so these are the abdominal pelvic cavity punya regions and quadrants. Okay, so I will not be explaining about the muscles in details yang cover the whole body ni. Nanti kita akan pergi ke musculoskeletal system lah. Tapi you can just briefly look into it sebab yang ini sebenarnya yang saya nak tunjuk ialah organ-organ yang terdapat di dalam kuadran tadi contoh mana you nampak ni adalah renal right kidney ni adalah renal lah then you have the what we call as pancreas so ni semua adalah struktur-struktur di dalam badan dekat bahagian abdominopelvic cavity Okay. The liver tadi yang saya kata letak dekat right hypochondriac region tadi Okay, and it been closed by the muscles dan sebagainya. Okay. So that's all for our first lecture. I hope it has been giving you more ideas and knowledge about the terms, especially in anatomy lah. So introduction, the first one ni kita more to anatomy lagi because we have not gone into specific system. So once we have entered into specific system, then we will learn specifically about the functions lah of the organs. Okay. All right. So I hope you will be able to do your assignment for these modules. Okay. What I need you to do is that first and foremost is you have to draw. Okay, you have to draw. I don't want you to copy paste I don't want you to get any images from Google. I want you to draw because anatomy is actually the art of human body. So I want you to draw the the body, the human body, and then label all the directional terms that have been mentioned with the plane that exists to divide the body into few views. So lukis satu gambar dulu yang ada directional terms, lukis satu gambar lagi yang memberikan potongan-potongan badan dan memberikan gambaran apa right and left lateral region, view, anterior and posterior view, superior and inferior view. So you namakan plane-plane tu dan you tunjuk bahagian view dia. Okay, just a general one yang macam dalam slide saya tadi lah. Okay, the second one is that I want you to explain and give me an example of one negative feedback and one positive feedback with explanation of the homeostasis process. You explain macam mana negative feedback tu. Contoh, katakan you ambil contoh perubahan gula dalam badan. So perubahan gula dalam badan tu whether it's increase or decrease and then you explain lah kalau gula tu increase, so apa yang jadi dalam homeostasis process tu sehingga dia terjadinya negative feedback ke ataupun positive feedback untuk kembalikan dia kepada normal ke ataupun untuk enhance or strengthen the changes. So explain the homeostasis system. Give me one example of negative feedback and one example of positive feedback. And lastly, your assignment is that you have to name all the organ based on 4 quadrants of abdominopelvic cavity. 4 quadrants. Saya tak nak you pakai 9 region, saya nak you pakai 4 quadrants of abdominopelvic cavity. Okay, so there are 3 assignments here. First is that you have to draw and label all the directional terms and body planes. Okay. Second, you have to give an example of negative feedback and positive feedbacks and explain the process. And thirdly, you have to name all the organs that exist in the 4 quadrants of abdominopelvic cavity. Okay, so please submit your assignment to me. You can email it to me while we are not being assigned into the ITEL system. Or if you have been assigned into the ITEL system, kindly upload your assignment before our next class. We will discuss the answer later in our next class. And remember, all assignment contributes to your continuous assessment marks. Okay, enjoy and hope you can understand the materials that have been delivered today. If you have any questions to ask, please do not hesitate to text me in the groups and we will discuss it in the class later. That's all. Thank you. Bye bye, and have a good